Hello and welcome to the 1.2 tutorial of geometry, and today we are going to be talking about the distance formula. Now the distance formula is very similar to the Pythagorean theorem. I know you guys have learned this in 8th grade, but just to remind you, the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And just to go a step further, in order to figure out how to find c by itself, you square root both sides. So that's what we're doing here, square rooting both sides. And then our final answer will end up being the square root of a squared plus b squared equals c. Now, the reason why I say that is because that is how we're going to construct our distance formula. Now, the only difference between the Pythagorean theorem and the distance formula is that instead of using just letters, we're actually going to be using coordinates. If you guys remember, with a coordinate, you have a coordinate plane. This is the x-axis. This is the y-axis. And then you have points. And those points are labeled with typically an x and a y. So for this first point, I'm going to just call it x1 and y1. So that's going to be the coordinate for that point, and obviously we're going to be using numbers here in a moment. And then this one I'll call x2, y2. Now using these coordinates, we are going to write out the distance formula. Once again, it is very similar to the Pythagorean theorem, just a little bit more complicated, of course. What we're going to do is we're going to do the big square root, just like the Pythagorean theorem. In our a, we're going to put our x's in here. And then our b, we're going to call our y's. And that will all equal the distance. I'm going to call that D for distance. So what we're going to be putting in this first parenthesis is our x's. We're going to subtract them. So for instance, x1 minus x2. If you wanted to, you could say x2 minus x1. That would be perfectly fine. In the second parenthesis, I'm going to do the exact same but with y's. So I'm going to call this y1 minus y2. That is the distance formula. Square root of x1 minus x2, put that in parentheses, squared, plus parenthesis y1 minus y2 squared. So here's the distance formula, and I'm going to show you how we can use coordinates in order to find the distance. So I'm going to choose two coordinates, 0, 3, and 4, negative 1. And I'm going to plug these numbers into my formula to be able to figure out how far apart these are. In other words, what is the distance? So before I do that, I'm going to label these. I'm going to just do this in a different color for right now. This is good. I'm going to call this my x1, and this is my y1. Remember, coordinates are always x comma y. And then this one is my x2, and my y2 is what I'm going to call this. So we got x1, y1, and x2, y2. And from here on out, all I have to do is plug these into the right spots. So instead of saying x1, I'm going to write 0, because that's what x1 is. Minus, instead of saying x2, I'm going to write 4. Make sure you don't forget the square, so I'm going to put the square out there. Plus, now I'm going to do y. y1 is 3 minus y2. y2 is a negative 1, so I'm going to put in a negative 1. And if you guys remember, equals D, if you guys remember, two negatives always come together to make a positive. So technically, rather than saying 3 minus negative 1, this really means 3 plus 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add those things in the parentheses. So I'm going to take 0 plus 4,